What if I told you that the United States Supreme Court just dropped a bombshell 6-3 ruling that gives American parents the legal right to pull their children out of LGBTQ instruction in public schools? That one of the dissenting far-left justices actually argued that if parents do not like what their children are being taught, they should just go find a different school. That the Supreme Court is about to rule in the next 4 weeks on whether mail-in ballots can be counted after Election Day, in a decision that could single-handedly end the Democrats' primary method of stealing elections. And that President Trump currently has a 95% win rate at the Supreme Court, while the far-left activist judges in the lower courts keep getting overruled and humiliated. Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. This morning, the highest court in the land sent a message to every school board, every radical progressive administrator, and every far-left ideologue in the American public education system. That message is simple. Parents have rights. Children are not your property, and you do not get to force sexually explicit material on 5-year-olds without their parents' knowledge or consent. The Supreme Court just ruled 6-3 that parents can opt their children out of classroom instruction involving LGBTQ-related content that conflicts with their religious faith. And the 3 justices who voted against this, the 3 justices who believe that parents should have zero say in what their children are exposed to in taxpayer-funded public schools, made arguments so absurd and so disconnected from the reality of American family life that when you hear what they said, you will not believe these people sit on the highest court in the nation. But this ruling is just the beginning, because the Supreme Court session ends in 4 weeks. And before it does, the court has to release opinions on 2 additional cases that could reshape American elections and American citizenship for a generation. And one of those cases has a 73% chance of going our way. If you believe that parents should have the final say in what their children are taught in school, and that no government bureaucrat or activist teacher should be able to override a mother or father's judgment about what is appropriate for their own kids, smash that like button right now. Every click sends a message that the American family is not dead, and that parents are taking back control of their children's education. Because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what the Supreme Court just ruled and why it is a historic victory for every parent in America. What Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said during deliberations that reveals exactly how the far left views your children. Why the upcoming mail-in ballot ruling could be the single most important election integrity decision in modern history. What the birthright citizenship case means for the future of this republic. And why President Trump keeps winning at the Supreme Court while the lower courts keep losing. Now let me start with what happened this morning, because this ruling is a massive deal, and every parent in America needs to understand what just changed. The case involved a coalition of parents from different religious faiths and different backgrounds who came together around one simple principle. They wanted to know what their children were being taught in school. That is it. They wanted to be informed. They wanted to be notified when classroom instruction involved books or material that dealt with topics that might conflict with their religious beliefs. And they wanted the right to have their children excused from that instruction if they chose. For years, the school district in question had a policy that did exactly that. Parents were notified. Parents could opt out. The system worked. But then something happened. So many parents started opting out that the school board panicked. They realized that when you give parents the choice, when you let them actually see what is being taught, a massive number of them say no. We do not want our children exposed to this. And instead of taking that as a signal that maybe the material was inappropriate, instead of listening to the parents who fund these schools with their tax dollars, the school board did the opposite. They eliminated the opt-out policy entirely. No more notification, no more choice. Your children will be exposed to this material whether you like it or not. The parents sued. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And this morning, in a 6-3 decision written by Justice Samuel Alito, the court ruled in favor of the parents. The school board must notify parents when instruction involves material that may conflict with their faith. And parents have the right to have their children excused. Justice Alito wrote that without this protection, parents are left with an impossible choice. Either risk their child's exposure to instruction that burdens their religious exercise, or pay substantial sums for alternative educational services like private school or homeschooling. And for millions of American families, that second option is not a realistic choice. It is a fantasy. Not every family can afford private school tuition. Not every family has a parent who can stay home to homeschool. Not every small town in America has multiple schools to choose from. For many families, the public school is the only school. And the idea that those families should just shut up and accept whatever radical content the school board decides to force on their children is not just wrong. It is cruel. And that brings me to what Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said during the deliberations of this case. Because what she argued reveals everything you need to know about how the far left views your children and your rights as a parent. During oral arguments, Justice Jackson looked at this case and said, and I want you to hear this in her exact words, she said she is struggling to see how it burdens a parent's religious exercise if the school teaches something the parent disagrees with. And then she offered her solution. She said parents have a choice. They do not have to send their kid to that school. They can put them in another situation. Let that sink in. A sitting Supreme Court justice, one of 9 people with lifetime authority over the interpretation of the Constitution of the United States, told American parents that if they do not like the sexually explicit material being pushed on their children in public schools, they should just go find a different school. Just go find a different school. As if every family in America has unlimited educational options. As if every town has a dozen schools to choose from. As if private school tuition grows on trees. As if homeschooling is a realistic option for a single mother working 2 jobs. As if the public school system, which is funded by the tax dollars of these very parents, has no obligation to respect the values and beliefs of the families it serves. This is what the far left actually believes. They believe your children belong to the system. They believe the government has a greater right to shape your child's mind than you do. They believe that once you drop your kid off at school in the morning, your authority as a parent ends and the state's authority begins. And if you do not like it, you can pay tens of thousands of dollars a year to escape. And if you cannot afford that, too bad. Your child will be taught what they want to teach them, and you will have no say in the matter. And consider the deeper game here. For decades, far-left ideologues like Ketanji Brown Jackson have been trying to eliminate homeschooling altogether. They do not want parents to have an escape route. Their ultimate objective is to use the power of the federal government to legally compel every family to send their children to public schools that they intend to turn into left-wing indoctrination centers. That is the long game. Eliminate the opt-out, eliminate private alternatives, eliminate homeschooling. And then you have a captive audience of every child in America, trapped in a system that teaches them exactly what the far left wants them to believe from kindergarten through 12th grade. That is what was really at stake in this case. That is why the dissent was so fierce. And that is why this morning's ruling is so important. The Supreme Court just said no. Parents have rights. Children are not wards of the state. And the public school system does not get to override the religious beliefs of the families it serves. Justice Sotomayor wrote the dissent, joined by Justices Kagan and Jackson. And what Sotomayor wrote is revealing in its own way. She claimed that today's ruling threatens the essence of public education. She argued that public schools exist to bring children together to learn about a range of concepts and views that reflect our entire society. She said that exposure to new ideas has always been a vital part of that project. Until now. Exposure to new ideas. That is how she frames it. That is how the far left frames forcing kindergartners to read books called Pride Puppy and Born Ready, which is a book about being gay, and The Prince and the Knight, a story about 2 men who fall in love with each other. These are books being put in front of 5- and 6-year-old children. And when parents say they do not want their kids reading this material, the far left calls it exposure to new ideas. As if reading sexually themed content to a kindergartner is the same as teaching them about a new country on the map. The American people see through this. 90% of parents across every demographic and every political affiliation believe they should have a say in what their children are taught in school. This is not a partisan issue. This is a parental rights issue. And the Supreme Court just affirmed those rights in the strongest possible terms. Now let me tell you about what is coming next, because the Supreme Court is not done. Not by a long shot. And the next 2 rulings that are expected in the coming weeks could be even more consequential than what we saw today. The current Supreme Court session ends in approximately 4 weeks, and before it closes, the court must release all of its remaining opinions. 2 of those pending opinions are absolutely enormous, and both of them have the potential to fundamentally reshape the American political landscape. The first one is the mail-in ballot case. And I need you to understand why this might be the single most important election integrity ruling in modern American history. The question before the Supreme Court is simple. Can states continue to count mail-in ballots after Election Day? Right now, in states like California, mail-in ballots continue to trickle in for days, sometimes weeks after the election. And as we have seen over and over again, those late-counted ballots almost always break overwhelmingly for the Democrats. Always. Every time. In every state. Without exception. We watched it happen in the 2020 presidential election. We watched it happen in the 2022 midterms. And we are watching it happen right now in California, where ballots are still being counted almost a week after the Los Angeles mayoral election. Batches of mail-in ballots keep appearing out of nowhere, and every single batch pushes the numbers toward the far-left candidate, while the common-sense candidate drops by the exact same amount. This is the mechanism. This is the primary tool the Democrats have used to manipulate elections for years. Count the in-person votes on election night, see where things stand, figure out how many additional votes you need, and then miraculously find exactly that number of mail-in ballots in the days that follow. The extended counting window is not a feature of democracy. It is the vulnerability that makes the fraud possible. And the Supreme Court is about to rule on whether to shut it down. The betting markets right now give a 73% chance that the Supreme Court will ban the counting of mail-in ballots after Election Day. 73%. That is not a coin flip. That is a strong probability. And the legal reasoning is straightforward. It is called Election Day. Not election week, not election month, the day. If you want to vote by mail, you mail your ballot so that it arrives by Election Day. If it does not arrive by Election Day, it does not get counted, period. All counting must be completed by midnight on Election Day. If a state cannot count its ballots that fast, it needs to figure out how to count faster. Every other serious democracy on earth manages to count votes on election night. The idea that the most powerful and technologically advanced nation in human history cannot do the same is absurd on its face. If this ruling goes the way the odds suggest, it will be devastating for the Democrat election machine. No more late ballot drops. No more mysterious batches appearing days later. No more week-long counting windows that create the opportunity for manipulation. Elections will be decided on election night by ballots that arrived on time, from voters who can be verified. And the era of the Democrats finding exactly the number of votes they need in the trunk of a car 3 days after the polls close will be over. Think about what that means for 2026. Think about what that means for every midterm and every presidential election going forward. The single most powerful weapon in the Democrat playbook gets taken away, permanently, by the United States Supreme Court. Now let me tell you about the second pending case, because this one is a long shot, but if it goes our way, it changes everything. The Supreme Court is also set to rule on President Trump's birthright citizenship executive order. This was one of the very first things Trump signed when he returned to the White House. An executive order declaring that birthright citizenship, the practice of granting automatic citizenship to anyone born on American soil, regardless of their parents' legal status, would no longer be the law of the land. Under the executive order, only children born to at least one American citizen parent would automatically receive citizenship. The logic behind this is something that most Americans instinctively agree with. Right now, if an illegal alien enters the country and has a baby on American soil, that baby is automatically a United States citizen, full citizenship, full rights. And that child then becomes an anchor for the entire family, creating a pathway that incentivizes illegal entry. The system rewards people for breaking the law. And the children born under this system are as legally American as someone whose family has been here for centuries, for generations, since before the founding of the Republic. President Trump signed the executive order. Legal battles ensued immediately. The case went through the lower courts, where far-left activist judges predictably struck it down. And now it is before the Supreme Court. The betting odds on this one are steep. 94% chance the court strikes down the executive order. That leaves a 6% chance that it is upheld. Those are not great odds. But 6% is not zero. And stranger things have happened before the Supreme Court. If, and I acknowledge this is a big if, but if the Supreme Court upholds President Trump's birthright citizenship executive order, it would be one of the most consequential legal decisions in the history of the Republic. It would end the anchor baby incentive overnight. It would fundamentally reshape immigration law. It would send a message to the entire world that American citizenship is not a participation trophy handed out to anyone who happens to be born within our borders. It is a birthright reserved for the children of Americans. Now, even if the odds are long, this case matters because even a loss at the Supreme Court clarifies the legal landscape and sets the stage for congressional action. If the court says this cannot be done by executive order, then it becomes a legislative priority. Pass a constitutional amendment, pass a statute, do whatever it takes through the proper channels. The issue does not go away just because the court rules one way. The American people overwhelmingly support reforming birthright citizenship, and eventually their will is going to be reflected in the law. Now let me step back and give you the big picture, because there is a pattern here that every American needs to see. President Trump and his administration are currently operating at a 95% win rate before the Supreme Court. 95%. Nearly every single case that reaches the highest court in the land is being decided in favor of the America First agenda. And this is happening while the lower federal courts, packed with far-left activist judges, are ruling against Trump at a rate of roughly 65%. Think about what that means. The lower courts, filled with Obama-era and Biden-era appointees, are functioning as a wall of resistance against the will of the American people. They are striking down executive orders. They are blocking policy initiatives. They are issuing nationwide injunctions designed to grind the Trump agenda to a halt. And they are doing it not because the law requires it, but because their personal political ideology demands it. This is not jurisprudence. This is lawfare. This is judicial activism masquerading as constitutional interpretation. But every single time one of those lower court judges issues a ruling against Trump, the case goes up the chain. It goes to the appellate courts. Sometimes it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And when it reaches the Supreme Court, Trump wins 95% of the time. That number tells you everything. It tells you that the lower court judges are not ruling based on the law. They are ruling based on their politics. Because if the law actually supported their decisions, the Supreme Court would uphold them. And it is not. It is overturning them over and over and over again. The America First agenda is legally sound. It is constitutionally sound. It is being validated at the highest level of the American judiciary. And the only obstacle between the agenda and its implementation is a collection of lower court activist judges who are substituting their own ideology for the law of the land. And they keep getting overruled. This is why the Supreme Court matters so much. This is why the 2024 election mattered so much. This is why every election matters. Because the judges who sit on these courts determine whether the will of the American people is carried out or whether it is blocked by unelected ideologues who believe they know better than the voters. Today's ruling on parental rights is a victory, a massive victory. Parents across this country can now protect their children from material they find objectionable in public schools. That is a fundamental right that should never have been in question. And the fact that it took a Supreme Court ruling to affirm something so basic tells you just how far the far left has pushed this country away from common sense. But the victories are stacking up, and the next 4 weeks could produce 2 more rulings that reshape the country in ways that the Democrats cannot reverse. If the mail-in ballot ruling goes our way, and the odds say it will, the Democrats lose their most powerful election manipulation tool permanently. No more counting ballots for a week after the election. No more mysterious late drops that all go to the same candidate. No more California-style chaos where ballots appear out of thin air days after the polls close. Elections get decided on election night, the way they are supposed to be decided, the way every serious democracy on earth decides them. And if the birthright citizenship ruling goes our way, even at 6% odds, it would be the kind of seismic shift that comes along once in a century. The end of the anchor baby incentive. The beginning of a new era where American citizenship means something again. The Supreme Court is delivering. Justice Alito is delivering. The conservative majority is delivering. And every single ruling that comes down reinforces the same fundamental truth. The America First agenda is right. The Constitution supports it. The law supports it. And the American people support it. The far left can throw tantrums. They can file lawsuits. They can pack the lower courts with activist judges. They can scream and protest and call everyone they disagree with a bigot. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court of the United States has the final word. And that word, over and over and over again, is siding with the American people. Today, it was parental rights. In 4 weeks, it could be the end of post-election ballot counting. And maybe, just maybe, it could be the end of birthright citizenship as we know it. The victories keep coming, the momentum keeps building, and the far left keeps losing at the only court that ultimately matters. We are on the right path. The republic is being saved, one ruling at a time. Don't stop here. The Supreme Court has 4 weeks of blockbuster rulings ahead, and every single one could reshape the country. Click on the next video and join us as we continue to cover the most consequential Supreme Court session in a generation and every victory that is bringing America back from the brink.